Welcome back to the Links Golf Podcast. I'm digital editor Al Lunsford for Links. Joining me is Joe Passoff, my co-host. And today we are joined by Martin Ebert, one of the golf course architects, part of the McKinsey and Ebert firm, along with Tom McKinsey, based out of England. And I think he joins us from somewhere else today, right? And maybe moonlighting in a different sort of career than your normal one.
Well, that's correct. Yeah, I'm in Austria, refereeing at the Austrian Open. I'm an R&A referee, so that involves obviously refereeing at R&A events, but we get experience on DP World Tour events, and obviously help them out with being a guest referee. So it's really educational, I think, in terms of seeing some elite level players play the game. And also to learn a little bit about the rules. Well, hopefully I've learned about the rules and I'm just applying them. But anyway, it's another part of the aspect of my life, I suppose. So one which is very enjoyable.
Well, Martin, don't let Luke Donald get away with anything just because he's the Ryder Cup captain.
Yeah, well, no, it's interesting how players, they think they know the rules, and I went to one ruling today. Ball was just over the white line out of bounds on the first, sadly for the player, and he said both of my fellow players have said that the fact that part of it's touching the line is means that it's inbounds. I had to say really sorry, but I'm afraid it isn't. So it's interesting how much or little good players know about the rules.
That's why you're there.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us, making time between rounds to talk with us today. Martin, you and Tom, your firm has been advising most of the courses on the Open Championship Rota. This is a perfect fit for us because we're presented by Perry Golf this season on the Links Golf Podcast, who have been bringing golfers to the world's most legendary courses, including being an authorized provider of packages to the Open for 40 years. And we actually had a group just return from a trip to Ireland, and included in their travels were trips to Rosapina and Ballyliffin, Port Stewart, and then they played the Dunluce course at Royal Portrush, which we understand you had some work to do there before the last Open Championship and maybe going into this year's championship as well. Would love to talk to you about, maybe as a refresher, what was done before the Open in 2019, and then anything else that has been done since.
Yeah. No, my involvement started quite a long time ago. I'd have to go back into the memory bank for exactly when. I think it was around the start of the new millennium, with Donald Steele, who Tom and I both worked for, and we were out there at the invitation of the club to look at the practice facilities and also back tees as well. Those projects took some time to come to fruition, but we worked on the practice ground, a new short game area, and back tees, and ultimately that led to the hosting of the Irish Open, which I think in some ways was a bit of a test case for could the Open be hosted at Portrush. So that then triggered obviously behind the scenes activity between the club, the R&A, and the Northern Ireland government to see if the Open could be brought to Portrush. And that was, just a fascinating journey. Obviously, the Open is as big as the Irish Open is. The Open is another level altogether. And I think some lessons were learned from the Irish Open, which was very successful. But obviously, to host that number of people, it takes some real detailed planning. The R&A were very, very clear from the outset that the old 17th and 18th holes really had to be removed or used for infrastructure for the Open for the main spectator village, and so that obviously necessitated creating two new holes. So I guess that's where we came in on the really exciting part of the project as far as Portrush is concerned. So yeah, I can give you as little or a lot of detail on that, just as you wish and as time allows.
Well, our publisher Jack Purcell, part of that trip to Ireland on the grounds, was giving us the lowdown. He went to Harbour Bar, stayed at Dunluce Lodge there on the fourth hole, and was hearing talk of 275,000 tickets sold for the week, and these grandstands on the 18th current 18th hole with that could fit up to 4,000 to 5,000 people. So it's going to be quite the scene there this year.
Really well. Yeah. So I mean, I think the R&A were very clear, as I say, that they had to, the club had to lose a couple of the holes. Now that was where the historical research gave us a great help. Obviously, the members were very proud of their course. Harry Colt design back in the early 30s, and who wouldn't be? But if there was any sort of slight hesitation when people were talking about Portrush, it was the last two holes, the 17th and the 18th. There was, I think, a fairly well-known sort of description that it was the best 16-hole course in the world, for instance. So, but that was still difficult. You couldn't really say that to the members. So the historical research was fascinating in terms of it showing that when Harry Colt designed the course, he had two other holes beyond in what was called the triangle, which was beyond those 17th and 18th holes, because his clubhouse, or the clubhouse that the club had then, was up in the town. So in fact, the 18th was his second hole. The 17th was the 17th. And from the old photographs, the old first and 18th in that triangle were two really linksy holes on some fascinating and really exciting ground. So it was good that we were able to show the members, look, in fact, Harry Colt's course has already been changed. It's already lost two of the holes. And in fact, if he'd had the clubhouse position that we all now know and we had, to use as a base, that maybe he wouldn't have had those 17th and 18th holes in there. Unfortunately, with Portrush, they have, they're gifted with the land of the Valley course, which is extremely beautiful dune land. And in fact, there was a lovely gentleman who was a Portrush member, Alan Holmes, and he pointed us in the direction of the old 5th and 6th holes on the Valley, which were, one was a long 3 and another was a short 4. So, but we needed to replace the 17th, which was almost 600 yards, and the 18th, which was almost 500 yards. So we really had to take the land for those holes and squeeze the maximum we could out of that land. But we had confidence because the quality of the land was so good. We did have to move earth pretty much throughout the length of both holes. But I hope that people, when they go and play, they won't think we've done that. They will just think it's, we've just laid the holes out onto natural dune land. So I think I would argue, and I think most people would agree that the course is improved through the addition of those two holes, because the land is so much superior to the land at the old 17th and 18th. So that gave the R&A what they needed in terms of enough space. It gave the club, I think, two great additional holes. There was some issues in relation to that, because even at the Irish Open, there was sort of the confluence of two sets of greens and tees with sort of crossovers, and we were introducing another. And there was talk of, is there a player's bridge, for the Open? But in that landscape, it would have looked, awful. So in actual fact, what was installed instead was a tunnel, player's tunnel, and it's used twice during the round. It gets closed up between Opens, and there's beautiful sleeper shelters installed at the entrance and exit points. But it really it was sort of the final jigsaw piece of the puzzle, and that just meant that the flow of players and spectators could work perfectly well during an Open. So obviously it hadn't been to Portrush since '51, so the event had grown significantly, and a lot of lessons were learned from 2019, and I think it was so successful. But the R&A, being keen to increase the number of people coming to the Open for this year, before this Open, has led to us really looking at a lot of the big spectator infrastructure areas and making them even bigger. And that's a challenge in that, hugely topographically interesting landscape. It's not like a lot of links courses, which are generally flat with some dunes. This is, really land which moves an awful lot from the highest point to the lowest point. and the club were very, very insistent that they should not be, these big infrastructure areas should not be seen from any parts of the golf course. And through the use of our detailed plans, our CGI, we were able to prove that before anything happened, and make sure that that was realized as well during the implementation. So it will be an even bigger, hopefully an even better Open. That main spectator village proved probably not to be big enough last time, so that's being moved for this time. So I think it should be an even more enjoyable experience for the spectators.
Fascinating. That's really interesting that they use CGI to make sure everything was good to go, and we want people to see the golf course, not just the structures. So, Joe, I know he touched on a lot that you wanted to follow up on in some of your items for discussion.
Definitely, and one of them is Martin, when your team, the RNA, and the club went to then assess the golf course and the kind of not only test it provided for the best in the world, but how it served for galleries and so forth. Were there any then architectural tweaks that were called for, and did you make any adjustments in the run-up to this year's Open?
Yeah, there were a few. I mean, a few tight spots. I mean, to be honest, I think without that really strong will of the RNA and the club, I think if you looked at it on paper before the 2019 Open returned, you'd think this is just too difficult. You know, the topography is just too challenging. There are a few tight spots, but I think the way that we've helped and the contractors have managed to, I guess, massage the landscape to make sure that spectators can get around, that buggies can get around for health and safety, for TV and what have you. You know, I don't think people will notice when they come and play their members rounds or their visitor rounds. I don't think they'll notice. Obviously, they'll notice right now with all the stands up and everything really coming into shape. But there was a huge amount of work that was carried out to make it possible. The Open practice ground sits on the Valley course, so since from 2019 until this Open, there's been quite a lot of work on that to make produce some more realistic target greens with some bunkers. And that hole, the fourth hole in the Valley, as it was now the third, it never had any bunkers. So we had to persuade the members that it was in the best interest of the Valley as well as the Open. So again, this is where the CGI helped. We were able to produce fly-throughs of the hole and the practice ground and show that outside of the Open, when the target greens were allowed to grow back to fairway height, that they would just be beautiful undulations in the fairway, adding to the character of the hole. And the bunkers likewise would add to the strategy and the beauty of the hole as well. So no, there's been a lot of work, and the club and the RNA have been very, very important partners in that, in determining exactly what needed to be done, both for 2019 and for this Open.
So no other significant design changes in that time, more about accommodating and providing for infrastructure.
Mainly, there were a few. The seventh green, that's the first of the new holes, the par 5. The green there, we made a minor adjustment to the rear of the green, the shapes of the rear of the green. So that was done, I think, the winter after the last Open. Then what else? Just sort of adjusting some hollows so that they didn't collect the ball quite as strongly. The eighth hole in particular, well, both 7 and 8, there were areas of those fairways where the balls would just collect a little bit too much, and as a result, you just got a lot of divoting. Now, you could say that happens on a lot of links courses and a lot of other areas at Portrush, given the strength of the undulations. But when you introduce new holes, if there's anything that stands out as, could we improve that, then obviously the opportunity is discussed and then in this case taken to make those adjustments. So there's been a few issues like that. The other very minor adjustment is at the front left of the first green. Now that, I think that's one of the best greens in the world of golf, and it's incredible, an uphill hole, how good an uphill hole can be, an uphill approach, strongly uphill. But I think the green at the end of it is part what makes it such a great approach and such a great hole. And it's almost 4 quadrants, I suppose. And the hope last time was that the flag would be put at the front left. A very dangerous flag position, as I'm sure you know, where if you're just slightly too long, the putt back down is like putting on a staircase, really, down a tier. And if the green speeds are such, not that they're that fast for the Open, or generally they're not that fast for the Open, but if the wind just would catch the ball, then it could be off the front of the green into the cavernous approach bunker potentially. And so that led the R&A not to use that area of the green for a flag, which was a shame. So if 2 or 3 years ago, we just made a minor adjustment to it just to make it slightly safer. And I don't think the members would even realize that that's been done now. They did, obviously, when it was being done. But it just creates a flag, which, again, the R&A can decide just how perilous they want to make that. There is still an opportunity to if someone was very heavy-handed with a putt from the back through to the front, that it could go off the front of the green. But they might prefer to be just a little safer and choose another position. But that section of the green, all being well, assuming that the wind doesn't just roar down from behind the green, hopefully that should be used. So that's an example of a minor change, but I think will have a big impact in terms of how that particular hole plays. By the way, I don't think there'll be any changes to the out of bounds. So let's, which I know was a controversial feature on the 1st and maybe the 18th as well.
Well, Al, we had talked about this before we formally started the podcast, but Martin, you did borrow from the Valley course, the sibling golf course, which has been very highly regarded over the years, perhaps not even realizing its full potential, but people loved it. It just always paled in the shadow of Dunluce. So as we understand, you were mentioning earlier, you have undertaken a significant project in making some alterations, some adjustments, as Mr. Fazio likes to say. And what have you done at the Valley course, and how will you anticipate that will elevate it in people's minds?
Sure. Well, of course, when we took the 2 holes from the Valley for 2019, we had to make it back up to 18 holes. And at that stage, it didn't really work to just put 2 new holes on the Valley. It just the configuration just didn't quite work. So in fact, we created 3 new holes, and the old 18th of the Valley, which was a par 3, that was dropped out of the layout. And that's a pretty strong and tough par 3 and much loved by the members. So the club had always had ambition to improve the Valley from, I don't know, 5 years ago when they had a sort of a vision document produced. And that went to a certain extent hand in hand with facilitating the Open. The media center was on the old second fairway, and that was took a long time to recover after the Open because of the length of time that the media. I know you probably did a lot of your work in there, so that took a lot of time to recover. The 3rd hole in the Valley, a par 3, with the extension of the practice ground to make the club practice ground, to make that the main spectator village, that became a bit of an issue for the Open. So all these issues were sort of tied up into a project to produce a master plan for the Valley course. There was a little par 3 course called the Skerries, which was totally underutilized and unused. And that land became available for the extension of the Valley as well for this year's or this last project that we've had for the Valley. So the construction was carried out on the front 9 element of the master plan 2 years ago and has grown in and is open again this year. And I think it's transformed the front 9 of the Valley. It's given the Valley 2 loops of 9 again from the Rathmore Club and the Ladies Clubhouse, which is down at the far end. It's produced some incredible sea views for the holes, which at the moment are planned as 7, 8, and 9, and could well become 16, 17, and 18. But that just presents the golfer with some of the best views at Portrush down onto the beach, along the coastline and out to the Skerries. As I say, that's part of an overall master plan where there's a back nine project, which potentially, if the members voted for it, might happen at some stage in the future. And at that point, I think, the Valley I think it will. It's always going to be hard to equal the Dunluce, obviously, with its reputation and the sheer quality of it. But a lot of the land of the Valley I'd say it's probably almost as good and perhaps better than some of the land of the Dunluce. It's more genuine in terms of dune structures throughout. Quite often, I think it's slightly undervalued because people see when they play in the Dunluce, they get to Calamity, the famous par three, and they look down onto what is the flattest section of the Valley. But in fact, that has been part of the project to upgrade it. So we've given that more relief, which is where the open practice ground is located. So along with the fairway undulations and the bunkers, we've also put some dunes in down there as well. So I think it's always been a great course, as you say. Harry Colt laid that out. It was built more slowly as the club had resources available, and it was done very much by the green staff rather than by Harry Colt's specialist team. So it's been a great project to be involved with, and we hope that we might be able to fulfill the whole master plan eventually, and that will lead to Portrush having, I think, 2 courses that would, people would be very happy staying a week to play both courses, 2 or 3 times each.
Yeah, that sounds like the Valley course is right now it's should play, bordering on must play, and by the time you folks might get through with it, can't miss.
So, I think it's must play already, but yeah, it would be.
That's an exciting prospect.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Al, because the segue is so strong, I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll
fire away.
All right. So, Martin, in America, we think of what folks call the golden age of architecture, kind of the 1920s, but 1915 to 1940. And so many of the names that pop up here in the elite level, Donald Ross, A.W. Tillinghast, George Thomas, William Flynn, C.B. McDonald, Seth Rayner, and of course, that world traveler, Alistair Mackenzie. But when we talk to folks across the pond who know architecture just as well as anybody here, Harry Colt's name often comes up as the best of all. We may have to wait until we all have a pint together to have that debate, but explain what makes Harry Colt's architecture so good, so distinctive, and how it holds up so well today.
God, what a subject. Yeah, no, I think I suppose these old guys, they really invented architecture, didn't they? I think, the guys that came before them, they were very talented as well. They put the pegs in the ground and they did some reshaping. But I think, Harry Colt in particular really took it and turned it into a real profession. But then you have to judge it by the quality of the detail of the work. So I think we start by marveling at the layouts, quite often on very, very difficult pieces of ground. They weren't always easy. And what an amazing job he made of them. One of my favorite Harry Colt courses is Royal Portrush in the north of Spain, where Seve grew up. And I don't know if you've been there, but if you haven't, then you need to, because it's just a fantastic example of a brilliant course. I know you say routing, we say routing, but a brilliant layout onto the top of a quite a prominent hill. And somehow, Colt has routed that course to deliver people to the top of the hill so perfectly, no, it doesn't feel like it's much effort. And the views that you get from the top of that hill are absolutely second to none. You see the Palacio de Magdalena, you see the city of Santander, you see the snow-capped mountains, you see the Somo, the beach where Seve used to practice. It's one of the best places in the golfing world, I think. But that was just an example of one of his layouts. De Pan in Holland, I think the equal of any of the Surrey Heathland courses. And again, just the way he used that land, it was incredible. So his course layouts, his par threes were exceptional. I don't think we ever come across a Colt course where the par threes aren't standouts, in the round. And then yeah, I think probably in some ways, most importantly for us, it's the detail of the shapes. And we have to give Colt and his partners credit for that. But I think in addition, it's the people that he used. Frank's Harris brothers, for instance, Sutton's. He would use people that he'd obviously taught how what the shape should be like. And how often did he get to Portrush? How often did he get to Pedrenia? How often did Allison get his partner Charles Hugh Allison? How often did he get to Hirona? Well, we know he only was there for 1 week, but somehow they managed to impart their knowledge and their skills, I suppose, to people who then implemented them. So when you look at the distance that those guys traveled and the influence they had in so many parts of the world, then I think it's clear why he and his firm sort of stood so tall, really. And it's interesting, looking at there is definitely different styles. I mean, Tom Simpson we love as well in terms of the way he would bunker courses and his green shapes and what have you. Mackenzie, very different, in terms much bolder, bigger elevation changes. The examples that we've seen of some, you think, goodness, even with the green speeds of those days, how did those greens, how did they work? And some of the big mounds at the Jockey Club in Argentina, for instance, to the which I think was a prototype for the 8th at Augusta. Just incredible seeing, the height of those mounds around that green on a relatively flat landscape. So a lot of different styles even then, but I think if we were picking someone, then Colt would be pretty close to the top of the list of who we want to design a course for our own personal pleasure. I think he and just going around somewhere like Portrush and just seeing the shapes of the green surrounds and the green surfaces, it just shows class from start to finish. It really does.
Well, Al, again, me getting the opportunity to ask Martin Ebert questions is like throwing raw red meat to a hungry tiger. But I know you got questions too, and fire away, and I got a couple more eventually.
Well, it sounds like he would agree with Tony Deere. I don't know if you know him. Martin wrote
Tony, yeah, Tony, absolutely.
In our summer issue, and essentially the question was, is Harry Colt golf's greatest architect? And by the end of it, he has convinced himself that probably was the answer. You might agree, but go ahead.
Yeah, just interesting. Sometimes people talk about a Harry Colt bunker, for instance, and there's a typical Harry Colt bunker, and we've got photographs from a lot of the courses that he designed from the earliest years of those courses, and we've got a little sort of presentation where every bunker style is different. So we ask our questions: was that because his style changed over the years? Did he match that style to a certain landscape? Was it the client's brief that changed those bunker styles? So huge variability in terms of that key element of a golf course bunkers, and I suppose the ability to work on so many different types of land, whether it be classic seaside, heathland, parkland, downland, whatever it was. He was just applied such great sort of layout design, and then to add the great detail as well is you can't. Those are the two key aspects, I think, of golf course design: getting a memorable and 18 holes that uses the land so well, and then making sure the detail matches the landscape or improves on it, and certainly matches the standard of the layout. So I think he would be a good one to put as number one.
Well, another person that would know a lot about that, and you mentioned his name earlier, someone who you worked for, it was Donald Steele. I wanted to get your thoughts a little bit about him. I don't know that he's the most familiar name over here. I know Primland is a good example of a Donald Steele course that has some public access that people can play and see over here. But he also had the distinction of advising, like yourself now, all of the Open Championship venues, past and present. I think I read maybe he's the only guy that had that distinction. So what did you learn from him, especially in your role now consulting with those Open Championship venues, and what were some of the key lessons he taught you?
Yeah. No, I mean, Donald, I've got so much to thank him for. He gave me, the break, as he did to Tom, in this game. So we've got so much to thank Donald for. Yeah, I think of his life as sort of four facets, really. He was a great golfer, first off. Played in the Open in 1970 at St Andrews, and won the President's Putter three times in three different decades. So that was pretty special. So he a great golfer in his own right. And for those of you who don't know what the President's Putter is, it's a gathering of Oxford and Cambridge University alumni for a match play tournament in the freezing cold conditions of early January. And so it's a very convivial tournament, but one that is some serious golfing as well. So to have won it three times is pretty special. When he finished his educational career at Cambridge, he became a journalist, a golfing journalist. So that was another facet. Obviously, a prolific writer of books. So his knowledge of the game on that front is second to none. His after dinner speaking, I think I've never heard anyone better in terms of delivering his speeches. He'd probably work on his speeches more than anything else, I would say. And he would always leave people, just with the right amount of humor and the right amount of seriousness. So he was very special on that front. And then on the architectural front, it was his old partners, Frank Penning and Charles Laurie, who invited him into the partnership. And that led to an extremely distinguished career. And I think his love of natural golf, of links golf, that came through, of reducing earth movement to a minimum. That's always sort of stayed with us throughout. And sometimes we might have to move lots of earth, but we'll always try to move the minimum amount to produce the best results. So that was certainly something that we've learnt from him over the years. And he gave us a great platform. He was very good in terms of allowing us to design from a very formative stage. And Tom and we both made some mistakes, but that was key, I think, in our sort of learning process. So the contacts that he had were second to none in terms of introducing us to his company, and ultimately to us to some great clubs and people in the game. So no, we've got a lot to thank Donald for, and he's still going strong, which is great to report.
That's right. Back we spoke in I think 2022. This was probably right before the Open at St Andrews, because I remember asking you a lot of questions about St Andrews. But I asked you about what influenced you to pursue your career in golf course architecture. Speaking of Cambridge, you said you took a Cambridge team to the States in 1989. And played kind of a murderer's row of courses, including Pine Valley, Marion, Shinnecock, and National Golf Links on that trip, which kind of then set you off and wanting to do this as a career. I'm wondering if you have a favorite course in America that you've either studied or played or even done work on. So we'll exclude everything on the other side of the pond, but do you have a favorite American design?
Well, I mean, that tour was incredible. We were very lucky. We had some help in organizing that, because I was the leader of that tour, but it made a bit of a mess of the initial inquiries to clubs. But we'd had a very good gentleman by the name of Peter Green, and also David Patterson, the coach of Yale University. They both helped us put together an incredible fixture list. So Yale University was on there, for instance, Baltusrol, the country club, Gitansett. So no, we didn't play Gitansett. In the end, we were meant to play Gitansett. I played it subsequently. So and I don't know. I think Pine Valley stood out for me on that tour, head and shoulders, not above the rest, but it just had a special aura about it, I think. And that sort of remained the same until I made a return in 2019, actually, which was a busy year. We had the Hirono project in Japan on, but Simon Rankin, who's a good friend, former captain of Portrush, so I think it's the Portrush link, he was a member of Pine Valley, invited me for the member guest. And my game had gone a bit downhill since 1989, when, in fact, myself and a partner, one of the Cambridge guys, a very good player, we played Buddy Marucci. and we managed to halve our four ball better ball with Buddy and his partner. And that story seemed to sort of, well, not a story, but that fact seemed to have still drifted through to 2019 when I went for the member guest. So they didn't need to sort of see any playing ability at that point, because I'd halved Buddy Marucci, so that was good enough. And then all of a sudden I had the opportunity to join Pine Valley, which was obviously something to really treasure. So, and again, the aura of that place is really special. The quality of the golf course, the quality of the test, the shapes of the greens, the naturalness of the landscape is it's understandable how it takes everybody's breath away. So that's got to be right up there. I think looking forward to going to the Walker Cup at Cypress Point and just seeing the marvel that the different characters of terrain presents. Obviously, the seaside holes are the ones which really stand out, but to have that mixture of the dune holes, the open sand in so many places, and then the holes with the pine trees as well. What a great mixture of golf that is. So I guess those are probably the two standout ones in terms of the ones that I've been fortunate to play and look at and study. But there's a lot of golf that I haven't seen out in the States, so I need to improve my education further.
I don't think you're going to get many arguments with those two picks either. So well done. Joe, I know I want to go into what Martin has going on right now in terms of his projects, but anything else you wanted to touch on before we go to present tense with him?
Well, in a way, I was fortunate to spend a fair bit of time with Donald Steele, mostly at Primland, but also with the work he did very close to where Al is sitting, or not far away, at the farm course at Greensboro Country Club. That was a pretty big makeover at Chateau de Vigier, France, elsewhere. What I want to know, Martin, with you and Tom, is how has your work evolved separate from where things were when you were working for and with Donald?
Yeah, well, I was a member of Woking Golf Club when I joined Donald, and I imagine you might have experienced Woking, been there. I mean, what a great sort of marker in golf course architectural history, I suppose, with John Lowe and Stuart Payton, what they produced there, and they were great lovers of St Andrews, and some of those greens just incredibly beautiful shapes, strong shapes, the 18th, the 12th, some really, really big shapes on those greens. And maybe that over influenced me a little bit. Now, the interesting thing is that Donald didn't draw any plans, or no detailed plans. He would do some very sort of sketchy layouts, but he relied on working with the constructor, the shapers, whatever, to get his results. With my engineering background, we and Tom had a landscape architectural background, but we ended up fairly quickly starting to define our greens and green surrounds. Well, in fact, anything that was reshaped, we started to design them with contours. And in the early days, we put rather too many contours across the greens, or certainly I did. And that was influenced a little bit by Woking. Because of the big, strong slopes, I was producing greens that had almost, I think Mackenzie might have been proud of them, to be honest. Some of them had so much movement on them. And so I think over the years, I've personally, and I think Tom as well, sort of slightly tempered that down. We still produce greens with undulation in, but greens which are, they're not right on the edge, I suppose, because you look at so many of the great courses and their greens aren't on the edge. You look at Muirfield set of greens, there's some brilliant surfaces, but there's some slopes, there's no doubt about it, and there's some consistent slopes, but there's also some more minor undulation which make them as great as they are. So we've now really refined our detailed design for greens in particular, down to in Imperial we'd be designing at 2 inches in terms of elevation change, which is, I think, unheard of, really. And that was green surfaces, and then gradually over the years, sort of moved out. I think we need to think more about approaches and just how the ball reacts, because our email address when we started out the new company was pitch and run 18, because we wanted to reflect, landing the ball short and running it onto a green. But that only really works if you've got approaches which are interesting, but allow you to land the ball short, not for all 18 holes. Sometimes maybe you've got to carry it all the way. So that was where we then developed, and then green surrounds. And I suppose we've been so fortunate in playing at, looking at, studying, working upon so many of these great links courses that were either had beautiful natural shapes or shapes that the greats such as Harry Colt, Tom Simpson, Alistair Mackenzie would have had their hand in designing. So learning of just how those you get from the green edge, if it's a downward slope, then just how the variation of those shapes can really provide beauty in terms of the look, but also different types of shots and different thoughts of how you recover from a round green. So I think that's how we've developed bunkers as well, in terms of look back at some old photographs and think, goodness, did we produce those? So but we always make the point that we don't like to put one particular type of bunker on a course. We make a point of that in our annual review every year to feature how many different types of bunkers we've been involved with the design and construction of through the year. Rightly or wrongly, we get a name for putting sand areas on courses. Partly that's because we have the benefit of working on so many sandy sites, so many sandy link sites, and some people are critical of that. But we go back to the historical records and just see how those courses evolved from a much sandier landscape than they are today. Generally, over the years, the vegetation has just grown and become more and more rich. So there's the historical aspect and there's the ecological aspect in terms of the open sand areas on our links courses being so much more valuable for flora and fauna. So there's a lot of compelling reasons to do that. We also like the look of them, but not every member does and not every club does. So, it's certainly something that we always discuss when we get to a classic piece of links ground or a classic piece of inland sandy ground. And Hirono was actually quite an interesting example, where when we had the chance to go and advise Hirono, and I couldn't believe it. When I was a youngster, I would look at all these great courses in the World Atlas of Golf and come across Hirono and New South Wales and Royal Melbourne and place, and Pine Valley and Merion. And all of a sudden I'm a member of one of them. We're advising two of them. It's just incredible. But when it came to Hirono, I remember the World Atlas of Golf saying Pine Valley of Japan. It's the Pine Valley of Japan. And so I thought, goodness, this is going to be fantastic. We'll go out and just find all this sand. And the pictures showed these beautiful, huge bunkers, which we thought in the 30s, the only way they can produce those is if it's on sandy soil. And I'm not sure there's one grain of natural sand at Hirono. So it shows what they produced in those days. And with that reputation of being the Pine Valley of Japan, although I did used to say to them, actually, I think Pine Valley is the Hirono of America, but just to flatter them when I was out there. But
good call.
Anyway, it was really a question of saying, well, why don't we create this sort of sandy landscape? That's what you had in terms of a created landscape, but why don't we add to that? Which they agreed to. We used all the old bunker sand for those sand areas, and hopefully it feels like it should be there, and it feels like Hirono should be. So that was another very special project.
Al, one quick one. I have to know this. Martin, do you and Tom work independently of each other the way Lennon and McCartney would write songs, or do you collaborate at some point or most points?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, our lives are so busy that it's from a practical point of view, it's difficult to collaborate really closely. It's difficult, as you can imagine, two people working together and coming to agreement. But it did happen, and it has happened. And in fact, we're collaborating again now. But New South Wales was has been one of the most recent projects that we've been fortunate to work upon. And the club specifically wanted both of us to come down to Australia, and neither of us had been to Australia for a start. So Tom went first because he had some time available, and then I made a visit, which he then joined me upon. And as a result, the two of us developed the master plan proposals. And I think, looking back on it now, I think that's been a stronger master plan as a result of the input of both of us. But we said to the club, from the outset, look, at a certain point, the detail has to be one person. You just can't. Someone's got to be responsible for the drafting of those plans, and so that's been Tom. But even during construction, when maybe almost half of the greens have been built, I made a trip out and was able to provide some contribution. But on the whole, the detail is entirely Tom's, and I think he's made a great job. And the members seem to be very happy in these early days of playing with their new toy. So that, in answer to your question, yes, we've done it there. We've been fortunate to be recently appointed at Muirfield, which has been great. One of those defining moments, I suppose. Muirfield is great reputation, and it's almost perhaps a commission to do nothing because they love what they have so much, quite understandably. But still, it's been something that we've both contributed to, and both gone to Muirfield and looked at together and separately. And our young colleague Mike Howard as well, he's been involved in that process. And Chris Huggett, who he does so much great historical research for us as well, then he's involved. So yeah, I think we're seeing the value in collaborating and pooling ideas and debating them and ending up with the best set of proposals possible.
Al, I can sleep a lot better now knowing how the two collaborate, how they work, and
we don't always agree, of course. We don't always agree, so as you can imagine. But
seeing the solo acts is one thing, but people want to see the Beatles, right? They want to see the guys all together.
Well, I don't know if we're quite the Beatles, but
I've always called you the Beatles of golf course architecture.
Well, that's kind. Yeah, thank you, Al.
Well, the current project I alluded to, and we wrote about it in our summer issue. You guys, for the first time, are going to be building a course in the Caribbean. I know Abaco, you did with Donald Steele, had some input on, but this is the first McKinsey and Ebert design for a luxury development called Moncayo. And that is on the east coast of Puerto Rico. It's going to be finished in 2027. 7,200 yards, 18-hole championship course. And you'll also have a family-friendly reversible 9-hole short course. So a nice, interesting wrinkle there as well, along with a putting course and practice facility and what have you. Can you tell us a bit more about this new project?
Yeah. No, this was, looking back on it, it was an amazing call that I got from a great character, great friend called Lou Serafini, Canadian, member of Toronto Golf Club, Hamilton Golf and Country Club, a course that I designed with Donald, and we sort of overlapped the two companies, called Goodwood, now called Avalon, and so he knew our work and just sort of gave me a call and said, look, I think you'd be just the guy for this project that we have with my partner Armand Real, and so he said, let's go down. When you're next over in Toronto, we'll take you down, and so I was fully expected to book my ticket, and no, it wasn't booking a ticket. It was a question of whose private plane would we use, and I'd never been to a site in a private plane, so this was already very special, and what a site it was. We did some preparatory work. We downloaded LiDAR information, so we knew the character of the land and the strength of character that it contained, but nothing like seeing it obviously on the ground. Now, there had been two projects unsuccessfully started on the same site, and the course was pretty much built, actually. So there was a course there, but it was never played, as far as I can gather. And the hotel was built, but then back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when that developer went bust, the new one came in much later and knocked down that hotel crazily and started building another one. They then went bust, but these guys on a much more secure footing, have great backing. And I think with the beneficial tax laws for Americans in particular, going to live there for 5 months, then there's a lot behind it. And looking at it, the land is strong, but we were given again free rein. It was brilliant to be given this brief to say, right, we want the golf course to be the best it can be. So we made some changes. Some of the corridors, the holes have to stay where they were originally planned, but we've made some significant changes. We said we'd love to have a par 3 out to the point. Well, there's meant to be development there. Don't worry, we'll take the development out and you can put the hole there. So, to have that sort of attitude from, they weren't developers in the normal sense of the word. They were, golf lovers, and it needed to be obviously supported by the development. So it has so much. Every hole will be outstanding, I think. And there's not many which are ordinary by any means. The 2 9s both get to the ocean in different ways. The front 9, the 7th climbs up an approach similar in a way to Portrush first, but it just has the views off to the left to the ocean. The 8th will be a stunning par 3 down the hill to the point. And you see the sea from so many holes, but then you get onto the back 9 and you've got a much lower profile hole, the 15th, all the way along the seaside. A crossing par 3 before that, the 14th, is going to be a par 3 that crosses the carry of the 15th. Just makes the best of an incredible backdrop. So it's got incredible inland character. The views inland are as good as the views out to sea, and the views out to sea are pretty stunning as well. So yeah, and again, it's been so good working on the detail of that and making sure that as we said, Harry Colt, just his exceptional detail. We're trying to implement that sort of consistent quality of shaping to what we're doing there as well. So yeah, very, very fortunate to be involved with it, and an exciting team to work with. And the Auberge are going to they'll be running the hotel, which occupies a beautiful bay. So yeah, there's a lot to be looking forward to for when that comes to fruition completely.
Really exciting. Yeah, especially with the sort of the taking a page from Mike Kaiser and Ben Cowan-Dewar, those kind of guys, where you're reserving the best land for the golf. That's particularly exciting to hear.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. But no, it's still applying those sort of link shapes, those traditional shapes to to a modern course. So we hope that that's where people will notice a little bit of a difference. We hope. There's too much. On occasions, too much shaping for the sake of it. We want, again, people to think that we haven't shaped much at all. The bunkers will be a real standout on the course as well. I think there'll be something to be really striking and attract people's attention. A fun putting green. What do we call it? A Yunque putting green in honor of the mountains so close by. So,
Martin, is there an anticipated opening date for that for Moncayo?
Al, I think you said 27, didn't you? I think
that's what I had read.
Yeah,
it was
general.
I think it'll
be a soft opening of other holes, some of the early holes. Obviously, when you've got a sort of a sales aspect to it as well, then if we can give some holes early to allow potential investors to play, then that will all be all well and good. But obviously we have to fit in with the weather elements there as well. It's beautiful so often, but it can rain a little bit on occasions as well.
Well, thank you again for your time today. And we know it can rain in Portrush, and hopefully it doesn't rain on the fans, and in getting Rory McIlroy to quadruple bogey that first hole again this year. I want to avoid that at all costs. But
yeah,
we're looking forward to an exciting Open Championship and seeing your work displayed there as well. We really appreciate the time. And
pleasure.
Keep on keeping on with everything you got going on, from refereeing to building golf courses.
Well, thank you, Al, and thank you, Joe. No, it's been very enjoyable hour or so of discussion. So whenever you fancy doing it again, more than happy to join you.
All right, we'll call you again next week.
Perfect.
All the best, Martin.